folks. Rob Hannes here for the Preparedness Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best in preparedness information. You know, it's weird. I've been doing the same opening and closing more or less for about a year or so, and I just completely blanked on it. Anyway, you can find us online at thepreparednesspodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. We are also on Google+, although I don't do a whole lot on there as of yet. You can also email me directly at rob@prepcast.info. I know that's kind of a weird email address, the .info part, but that stems back when I launched the podcast. I had 3 different websites, one for a portal, one for a forum, and one for the blog or the podcast page. And when I relaunched the podcast, it was just too much to do, and you don't really need to separate it that much. So that's where that .info comes from. And if you go to prepcast.info, it should just forward directly to the regular website. So this is episode 191. We're going to be talking about a couple things. Before we get into that, though, I want to take care of the sponsor. That is buyemergencyfoods.com. They have some great food. If you haven't checked out the website, they've recently redesigned the website, and it is just packed full of information. I mean, it looks good, but seriously, they have a lot of information. One of the big things that they have is that their serving sizes are much bigger than everybody else's. But right on the first page down, if you go on the site, you'll see 8 reasons why Legacy is the best choice for food. And I'll just cover them here real quickly. Easy to prepare, ready meals. It's honest, transparent pricing. What you see is what you pay. They have free shipping on everything. They got versatility. A lot of I think actually all their meals are vegetarian, and they have meat that you can add if you'd like it. Most of them, or a lot of them, are gluten-free. They have a 25-year shelf life, so you can forget rotation. They've got quality and quantity of calories in their food packages. They're tested and certified. They've got a great meal variety, and number 8 here is voted best tasting. And, you know, I believe every one of these because I've had this. You've heard me talk about it. They've got great food. They got good tasting food. I do like what they're doing as far as their meal components. You know, if you are looking to find out how much you need for your family, they got some great calculators on there so you can calculate how much food you need. Overall, it's a great experience. Go to buyemergencyfoods.com and check it out. Okay, the first topic I wanted to cover is I'm getting some emails from listeners. Some of them are panicky, but most of them aren't. Most of them are asking my opinion on what's going to happen. And I think a lot of this is being driven by the news we're seeing. We've got the financial market indicators. We've got the spying on citizens, the NSA and Snowden that we're being bombarded with every day. We have the apparent hoarding of food and weapons and ammo by federal agencies. And it's looking like something's coming to a head. Something's coming to a point. And much like when we talked about the coming pandemic, back then I had said that a lot of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Some of it needs to be taken with a pound of salt. True, surely, we are living in a time that is different than any other time. I mean, the technology we have available to us right now is vastly different and allows the encroaching of personal freedoms and privacy like we've never seen before. Now, this doesn't mean that government is just now beginning to spy on their citizens or spy on other countries. That, I think, has happened for the entire time that we've had a government, wherever we've had a government in the world throughout history. So I don't really think that's anything new. It does seem like there is a lot of stuff happening, but it reminds me of several periods that I have already gone through. Now, it's no secret that I'm not a spring chicken. I'm not ready for retirement. I got quite a number of years, but I'm kind of in between there. So I have been preparing for about 3 decades. It's somewhere, I don't remember. It's about 28, 29. Maybe it's 30 years now. And I have seen several phases like this. One of them, I used to listen to Art Bell, not a lot because he was late at night and I didn't stay up that late at night, but I would catch some recordings every now and then. And he had some interesting guests, and I thought he was a great interviewer, which is one of the reasons I like listening to him, because he let the person tell their story, whatever it was. But he would talk about something called the quickening. Now, his reference for this quickening was earth changes and science-based and the mythological and the mysterious and ghosts and all that stuff. And I don't really know what his basis or foundation for determining what the quickening was, or how he was measuring it, or by what metrics he was going by. But he just had this feeling that something was going to happen. Things are speeding up. It's getting worse. It used to be X, now it's X plus Y plus Z, and it just seems like something bad is going to happen, or something major is going to happen. And then there was the militia movement back in the 90s. There was a lot of people who joined the militias who were pointing out the corruption of government, the heavy-handedness of government, the loss of freedoms, the encroachment of privacy. They were doing all this back in the 90s. And back then, a lot of people said, oh, we've got 5 years maximum before this all comes to an end, before the big showdown, whatever that means. And it didn't happen. So there are just a couple examples over the past couple decades of events, periods that people are looking at a very narrow time frame, and they're comparing it to another in recent narrow time frame, and they're saying, "Oh, something bad's going to happen. I can just see it." Well, no, don't get me wrong. I get into the same frame of mind too periodically, because it does seem like that. But when you look back on history, when I look back on my history, I mean, I started preparing 30 years ago. When I started preparing, it was about Russian nukes. You know, the Russian nukes were going to come, and there were these mathematical equations that basically said something like, if there is a 1% chance of Russia nuking us on any given day, by the end of 5 years, it becomes nearly improbable that they won't nuke us. Well, the problem with these sort of calculations is much like when Al Gore is talking about global warming, and he throws up a chart, and he shows the temperature increasing, and then he draws a dashed line continuing that trend for decades, and says, look where we're going to be in 50 years or 100 years. Well, yes, if that trend was to continue, but these trends never continue. In fact, you could see on that chart, and I'm only using this as an example because it's a widespread example. Everybody's probably seen this chart. But if you were to take any of these uprisings and draw a line, you would get the same conclusion. Or these downtrends in cooling from a higher temperature to a low, same thing. If you draw a straight line on a very small period of statistics, you get a trend. But the problem is that is far too short of a population sample in order to accurately predict what's going to happen. And that's how I see, or that's what I'm reminded of when I think of these types of events. That is to say, nothing is going to happen. I'm not trying to say you don't need to prepare, nothing's going to happen. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying, or at least what I'm trying to say, is that you shouldn't get panicky over it. Back in the day, when I was first starting out, actually not quite when I was first starting, when I had been preparing for a while, I've been into preparedness for probably at least 10 years, and then I started to make some money, got a job, and got some credit. And what I did was I got scared through a panic. I don't remember what it was at the time. And I put some preps on credit. Well, I'm sure you can guess the rest of the story. The event never happened. I didn't need those preps, but I still had to pay for them on credit, which means I was probably paying, I don't know, 15, 20% interest on those preps for stuff that I wasn't using. And yeah, I suppose it could be food or water and I could have used it or had it or something. But the point is I was paying more for something that I didn't need to get. And that's my point, is don't go into debt to be prepared, because you're completely going against the whole purpose of why you should be prepared. Now, of course, if I knew or had a very good knowledge that something was going to happen, like a comet or a asteroid or some sort of geological event that was going to be catastrophic, yeah, I probably would go ahead into debt and get whatever I could, but it would have to be really likely. And I mean, like, all the science backing it. Because I'll tell you what, back in Y2K, I did a lot of research. Before I started preparing for it, I did a lot of research on it to make sure it was going to happen. Now, today, you'll hear people tell you, oh, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Oh, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Oh, please, that was so obvious it wasn't going to happen. Yeah, but that's Monday morning quarterbacking. It's so easy to say that now. Nobody was saying that before. I mean, there were a few that were saying it's going to end, and a few saying nothing's going to happen. But if you discount those periphery of the curve, there wasn't that many people out there saying it wasn't going to happen. There was a large variety of people saying all sorts of different things. Everything from, a few things are going to happen to, oh, it's going to be cataclysmic. But there was so many different opinions on what was going to happen. It was very difficult to get a handle. I was following a couple experts, and these were not prepper experts. These were risk management people that worked for banks. For example, Deutsche Bank had, I forget what his name was, but this is what his job was determining risk for the bank, and a couple other people like this. And I was following their research and their investigations, and they were uncovering all these problems. And so there definitely looked like there was going to be some events happen from Y2K. Something was going to happen. Not cataclysmic. And just to illustrate that, I went to a New Year's Eve party in Phoenix. You know, I live in the suburbs. I went to a party in Phoenix on New Year's Eve. So I was pretty confident that we weren't going to have major problems, but nothing happened. I mean, we've even had some events happen before Y2K that you could say, look, this happened 4 months before, 3 months before, like the sewage backing up in LA or San Diego or wherever that was in California, because it was a Y2K bug. They came out and said, yes, this is a Y2K bug. So you could see, we already have some events related to this. It's likely that we're going to have more. So even with all that testimony and information and data and research and investigation that I and people who are far smarter than me had done on the event, the Y2K bug, we had nothing happen. And there may have been some events, but they were so small, they weren't widely known. So what does this tell us? Well, what this tells us is even a sure thing, a sure known event forecasted, predicted to happen, still may not happen. So what I'm trying to get to you is, don't panic. There's no reason to panic over any of this. One of the things I do when I go through the news, I'm a news hound. And as if you go to the website and look at the Prepper News Watch, you probably can tell that. I go through about 1,000 stories a day and pick out what I feel is relevant or interesting and put it on the Prepper News Watch. I've done this all my life. I've always been attached to the news, trying to keep abreast of what's going on. And that's part of the prepper mentality, is I want to know what's going on, so I have advanced warning as much as possible, so I can make or take actions or whatever steps I need to either be better prepared or leave if I have to, or whatever it may be. However, I go through these periods where I start to get depressed. And quite honestly, I'm going through one of those now where it's not depression, but it probably feels a lot like depression. I'm just gloomy because all the news is starting to get to me. In fact, I've already started to not go through most of the news that I usually go through because I just can't take it anymore. I can't tolerate it. I have to remove myself from it. And that's the same thing I would recommend to you. I know it's difficult to take somebody else's experience and embrace them as your own because everybody's reality is different. That's another thing I've learned as I've grown older is what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. And my experiences are sometimes hard to embrace, much like it's hard for me to embrace other people's experiences, because even though my father, my mother, my friend, my wife, anybody who's trying to give me advice based on their experience, I don't necessarily embrace it as my own. I don't necessarily, oh, well, you did this. Oh, sure. Okay, well, now I know. I just won't do it. No, sometimes I still have to experience it for myself. That might be stupidity. I'm not really sure. However, if you can take away from this that we've been through these sort of things before, and if you're going through the news, like probably I imagine a lot of preppers do, and you find yourself getting a little panicky, getting a little edgy, maybe being a little bit more gloomy than you normally are, or if you're not predisposed to be a gloomy person, step back from the news for a week or so. Maybe it only takes a couple days, maybe it takes a week. I've gone as much as a year sometimes. After Y2K, when nothing happened, after putting all the energy and effort into being prepared as much as I felt was reasonable to be prepared, and that still took a lot of effort, I wasn't interested in doing anything preparedness-wise for, I think it was 2 years. I got into a little bit more the second year, but it took a long time. I was burnt out from the experience and just needed a break. The news for me is a lot like that, and you're probably going to see on the Prepper News Watch less news stories, possibly even less economic stories, because I'm getting burnt out on this. I need to kind of step back from it. In fact, I may even stop the Prepper News Watch for a while, but I will get into more of that. Last week I had said there's a rather big announcement coming up concerning the podcast, and we'll talk more about that when I do announce it, and that'll probably be next week. I need to have some things lined up for this, and then I'll probably announce it next week. But anyways, if you're getting panicky, step back from the news. Don't watch the news. Don't read the news. Take a break from it. Do some happy things. Spend some time with your family. Spend some time with your kids. Get in touch with your reality as opposed to what's happening in the news more. That'll help. Once you have done that and you've become calmer, make a plan. Don't make a plan when you're panicky, because you're going to be your head's not going to be in the right place. You need to think about this, step back and removed, overlooking the situation. So make your plan when you're calm. That plan should include all the important aspects that you need to take care of: food, water, shelter, clothing, communications, defense, all those good things that we've talked about on many of these podcasts. And incidentally, you'll find a lot of this covered in my book, the Preparedness Capability Checklist. That's the whole concept of that is basically distilling it into those tasks that you need to do. But make your plan, including a budget. That's extremely important. You need to know how much you can afford towards your preparedness plan every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it is. And you need to realistically look at that and not go beyond that. It's really important to make steady progress as opposed to binging. And I think that's what a lot of preppers fall into, is they don't do anything for a few months because they got sidetracked with, football season or basketball or summer or whatever it may be, that, everybody has other hobbies as well. And then something will hit the news and they'll be like, oh my God, okay, we got to do that. Okay. And they'll binge and they'll panic buy, and they're like, oh, I'm so behind, but I only have $200 and I have to spend $500 worth of stuff. So you're going to be far better off doing it slow but sure, every month, every couple of weeks, whatever it is, whatever you can afford, and slowly build and slowly progress through your plan. Again, speaking from experience, I have done several bouts of panic buying, and it turns out to be a mess because in addition to not staying up with my preparedness plan and buying the things I should buy and suddenly needing to buy more than I can afford in order to feel comfortable with my preps, another aspect for not keeping up on it on a regular basis is or at least what I do is I forget what my inventory is. And by that I mean, where did I put that list of ammo? Where did I put that list of storage food? Is this the most current list, or is this the most current list? I'm not sure because I've done it several times. I'm not sure, and I keep doing this over and over. It's one of the things that I'm trying to break myself of this prepper habit, this bad prepper habit, is not following through. I'll make an inventory list of what I have, and then the next step should be making a list of what I need to buy and what order I need to buy it in. And then the next step is creating a budget of how I'm going to acquire the things I need to acquire. And then, of course, the last step would be making sure I stick with that plan, even though if I don't feel like it, if I need to buy 25 pounds of flour or wheat or corn that week, I need to do it. Anyone who has listened to the podcast for a period of time knows I'm really big on analogies, and the best analogy I can think of this is like exercising. In order to get the best benefit of exercising, you need to do it on a regular basis. You can't say, okay, I'm going to run a half mile a week or a mile a week and put it off, and then 3 months later say, well, I'm going to run 12 miles and it'll be all the same. No, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. And it's a lot like, prepping is a lot like that. Now, true, you could buy all your preps in one go if you have the money, and that, to me, is the big problem. I suppose you could, I don't feel like buying this week's allotment right now. I'm a little under the weather. I don't feel like it. At least put that money away so that you can do it next week and you can buy double. I suppose that would be acceptable, whatever you're comfortable with, of course. But the key is steady progression. Now, when you're making your plan, or when you're enacting your plan, as far as getting the supplies and making sure you have that which you need in order to survive on your own without utilities after a disaster or during a crisis event, don't bunch them up. Spread it out. Don't say, okay, we're going to get all our alternate energy stuff first, and then we're going to get all our clothing, then we're going to get all our food, then we're going to take care of water. Don't do that because, well, I think you could probably figure out why. If something happens, you may be able to supply, all your battery-operated gear with power. You might have all your clothing, but you don't have any food and water. Or you have some water because you took care of that, but you don't have any food. You need to spread it out. Start small. Start with a 3-day kit for everybody. Then as quickly as you can, move up to a week and then 2 weeks. Once you have 2 weeks worth of evacuation type of stuff, everything in bags, everything can be evacuated, food is lightweight enough that you can go on a moment's notice and be able to survive just about anywhere for 2 weeks. Now you've really started to accomplish something. You really started to take preparedness into your own hands. Just increase it from there and do it again on a slow, steady pace so that at any point something happens, you're as prepared as you can possibly be. So to answer those listeners, and I know I've kind of beat the horse a little bit on this, but I want to drive home the point because it's important. Why is it important? Well, if you're doing it right, if you're being prepared, if you're getting your plan together and you're working the plan, then you don't have to worry about what's going to happen. If you look at disasters, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, whatever, there are a commonality to all of them. You're going to need food. You're going to need water. You're going to need shelter. You're going to need some clothing. You're going to need tools. You're going to be able to defend yourself. You're going to need to be able to evacuate. These are the common things that come up all the time. Now, some disasters are slightly different, like economic disasters. Long-term economic disasters have different aspects. However, if you were to have 2 years' worth of food stored up, that would certainly help you during a long-term economic event. So you should not be thinking about what's going to happen. You need to think about how prepared am I, regardless of what happens. And that's my answer to what do I think is going to happen? I don't know. And I won't say I don't care, but that's not the point of this podcast. The podcast isn't about guessing what's going to happen. It's about helping you be prepared. And this is the most fundamental way that you can approach this and not have to worry about what's going to happen, because you're as prepared as you can possibly be. And so that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to cover for this podcast. Actually, it wasn't what I wanted to cover for the podcast, but I had received enough emails lately that I thought, you know what, I should probably cover this on the podcast and just take care of this topic right here. As I mentioned earlier in this podcast and the last one, there is some changes coming to the podcast and the website and stuff. Some I'm sure will be perceived as good and some will be perceived as bad. But I will explain all of that when I announce it, and I think that'll probably be next week. But until then, enjoy life, keep preparing, and stay safe.